Well, hello, my friends. Welcome to me, your host, Christian Watson. My friend, there is much uproar from people over Lia Thomas's recent victory. I say that with much reservation. In the NCAA Women's Swimming Division I tournament. Thomas recently swam to victory, no pun intended, beating out all of her opponents and clocking in just a few seconds short of the fastest woman to ever run that race. That was going to be the Olympian Katie Ledecky, if I'm saying that correctly, who went the 500-yard race that Lia Thomas ran at 4 minutes and 24 seconds. Lia Thomas won that same event with 4 minutes and 33 seconds, only a few seconds to spare, and she would have possibly had the title of the fastest woman to ever run these races. Now, of course, many people are justifiably upset. Many women's groups are justifiably upset. Many people who are in women's sports justifiably upset. And I've seen a lot of different people in the discourse they say a lot of different things. Some on the right have been saying that if women would have just spoken up when it mattered before it got to this point, then this wouldn't have happened, or they would be justified in their outrage. This is what Tim Pool and others have been saying. Others are predicting doom for the whole of women's sports and saying that women's sports are indeed doomed to fail due to the politically correct standards of our time. My friends, I want to shed light on two things. Number one, there were people who spoke out against Lia Thomas's inclusion. And we can go all the way back to January of 2022, which is where we shall go to understand the origins of this. There were folks who spoke out, but unfortunately those folks weren't necessarily heard. Now, obviously, there were not folks on the swim teams who spoke out publicly, per se, but there were folks who spoke to the media and spoke to other people who had the ability to change things, and unfortunately that didn't happen. You see here on your screen, Lia Thomas was actually accused of making their teammates feel quite uncomfortable in the locker room. Thomas still has male genitalia. In fact, according to this article from the New York Post, Thomas still likes women, has male genitalia, and reportedly didn't mind being a little bit too showy with their male genitalia in the girls' locker room. And of course, this all prompts the question, how in the world was this allowed to happen? Well, this was allowed to happen due to the NCAA standards, which they adopted not on the basis of anything sound or logically rigorous, but what they adopted on the misuse of a word that I'll get to in a second. So around January, when this report came out about how Thomas was making their teammates feel quite uncomfortable with their displays in the women's locker room, there was also another development happening, and that development was indeed the USA Swimming organization preparing to put out their standards for what level of testosterone a trans person can have before they enter into the race. Now, according to the USA Swimming Association, their standard is 5 nanomoles, I think I'm saying that correctly, per liter of testosterone. Now, the NCAA, what many people were hoping was that the NCAA would actually embrace that rule, but they didn't. They rejected that rule in early February, and instead said if a trans person has at least 10 nanomoles per liter of testosterone in their blood, they can compete. And also, the USA Swimming Organization, their requirements were that you have to have at least 36 months of consistent treatment, whereas the NCAA requirements were that you just had to have a year. So obviously the NCAA made it incredibly easy. They bent over backwards and made it incredibly easy for someone like Thomas to compete. Now, for those of you who don't know biology very well, who just may not know, the average woman has between 0.5 to 2.4 nanomoles per liter of testosterone. 5, even having someone who has 5 is way too much and risks unfairness issues and risks the integrity of the sport. But having someone who has 10 is exorbitantly too much and doesn't just risk unfairness, it practically assures it. But all of this, my friends, has been done under the banner of equity. And this is the time where we need to break out philosophy and ask ourselves, what does this mean? What does this word that has been used to justify these atrocities mean? Well, my friends, the word equity actually is in its nature a benevolent word. This was a word that was originally conceived for benevolent ends. The word equity came out of an early 14th century word, and that I will not say because I'll mispronounce it, but it'll be up on the screen, that basically meant the quality of being fair or impartial. Now, this is the general sense of the word equity. The legal sense of the word equity was even more benevolent. In law, it meant fairness in the adjustment of conflicting interests, the settlement of controversies by the dictates of good conscience, and of course, that good conscience, if we look at the Roman translation of the word equity, was the general principles of justice. So, my friends, in the 14th century, when the word equity was conceived in the annals of language, in the minds of men, it really just meant adhering to the principles of justice and thus being fair. That's all it meant. Now, in the 1980s, though, as this website explains, equity had taken on an entirely different hue. Equity actually began to mean, and I'll quote it, allocating benefits in various policy fields in such a way as to provide groups, persons, and places with at least a minimum level of benefits so as to satisfy their basic needs. This is a quote from Stuart S. Nagel's Equity as a Policy Goal, 1983. So this word, which simply just meant being adhering to the principle of justice and thus being fair, became, let us situate people with certain resources. It became a statement about resources, not a statement about principles. And herein lies the fundamental problem. When we have a society, or we have a word that is detached from its original meaning, and its new meaning is absolutely does not cohere to what it should cohere to, we're in deep trouble. We're in immense trouble. My friends, the principles of justice do not care about how much you have or how much you don't have. The current idea of equity certainly does, but the principles of justice do not. The principles of justice care about your actions. How do you treat your fellow man? How do you conduct yourself in life? Do you uphold your covenants and contracts? And if we actually use the term equity as it was meant to be used, the NCAA is in violation of it. The NCAA, if we use it how it was meant to be used, is actually the chief sower of inequity. Essentially, my friends, if equity is about being just, and we can believe justice is about adhering to what you agreed to do, protecting the rights of other people, then the NCAA, in rejecting the rules of the USA Swimming Association, which are still too much, by the way, but would have precluded Thomas from participating, and instead embracing an even more bigger standard that makes it even harder for women to compete, they have violated the principle of equity in terms of their relationship with their swimmers. Every swimmer that is on one of these teams works hard. They have to sign things. They have to do things that puts a lot on their body. It takes up a lot of their time. This is their life. And thus the NCAA has a contractual obligation to them to ensure the process is as equitable in the original sense of the word as possible, to ensure the process conforms to our conscience. Now, when we say the conscience, we don't mean any old conscience, because your conscience can be tainted and manipulated by its surroundings. We mean a conscience that adheres to first principles, a conscience that adheres to all of our moral intuitions, the intuitions that have made society possible, the intuition, which actually is also a duty to abstain from what someone else has, the intuition, which is also a duty, as Grotius would say, to give others in strictness what they might demand if you have taken it from them or if you have violated from them. These intuitions, these moral senses, constitute the basis of our ability to be moral actors. But the problem is, the NCAA won't even do that. They're justifying inequity under the guise of equity. This is not just about trans people in sports. This is about a man's word being viable anymore. My friends, if this kind of behavior were to go on a universal level, if everyone were to embrace this kind of behavior, violating the sacred bond of trust and fairness that these people promise to their swimmers, then civilization wouldn't exist. The biggest lesson we can take away from the Lia Thomas debacle is that all of us should keep our words, that the proper meaning of the word fairness precludes this kind of behavior from going on, and that the NCAA needs to grow some backbone, or they need to stop pretending as if they can regulate anything, because apparently their regulations are nothing short of unjust. Think on it. My friends, if you like me, and if you want to support me, then please donate to my Patreon. Please donate to my PayPal. Please join my Discord, which is in the comment section down below. I love you guys so much, and please stay better. Bye, guys.